The International Monetary Fund has completed its routine staff visit engagements with South Africa. The IMF staff discussed economic development in the country with government and other stakeholders. The IMF has highlighted that the COVID-19 pandemic has worsened South Africa's growth and fiscal vulnerabilities, and therefore the government is rightly prioritizing the response to the pandemic. Joining me now to talk more about South Africa's economic outlook is Peter Attard Montalto, who's the head of capital markets and research at Intellidex. Peter, as always, thank you very much for your time this evening. Now, one thing I want to focus on is some of the outcomes that have come out from President Cyril Ramaphosa talking about electricity and power supply at this year's World Economic Forum, saying that we need to break the monopoly. And how do we do that, given that we've been struggling for years with Eskom being a monopoly for power production across the country?
Good evening. Well, there are these two key seminal structural reforms that have been promised continually that we're still waiting for. One is obviously spectrum, possibly further delays with MTN now announced today suing ICASA as well. But on energy, we have this never-ending wait for more procurement to actually happen. DMRE likes to say that they've issued their Section 34 determination, the minister's done his bit. But it's obviously a lot more complicated than that. Eskom is crying out, and Andre de Ruyter wants to keep the lights on. They're crying out for more IPPs on the grid. But the whole process has got bogged down now in localization debates. DTIC has got involved. The process has been delayed and may well only launch now after SONA. And I think we're in this repetitive cycle from SONA to SONA about energy. And it ultimately comes down to politics and institutional capacity. The presidency is not ultimately, taking a tough decision, which is that you need to take some dramatic action on personnel and who is in charge of energy policy to actually move the dial. I think the presidency has the right idea on energy, but actually making it work is another matter.
Right. Something else that's going to be very important for the recovery of the country's economy is the vaccine rollout. And I just want a sense of just how important it will be for economic growth.
Well, it's important both obviously to actually do it and to get to firstly coverage of vulnerable groups to reduce the death rate and stress on the hospitals, but also then to herd immunity. But also it's important as a signalling mechanism, and I think this is really where investors are going to be looking at the coverage across different countries, the ability to roll out the vaccine, particularly if we're in waves and waves of this vaccine and revaccination through the coming couple of years. The ability to roll out the vaccine to get a process in place is going to be an important metric, I think, that investors look at comparing different countries. And here we have no certainty at all on when we're going to reach, say, the coverage of vulnerable groups. The Department of Health has not really been able to convince on a credible timeline yet. The process was all very delayed to start only this year, when the discussion over vaccines should really have started last April. And the same on the Treasury side as well. There have been a lot of question marks. So I think there's the dual importance here, which South Africa is still lacking on the credibility to meet those key metrics, say by Q3 of this year, or whatever it happens to be, to meet those vulnerable groups. The NDA target, I think no one is accepting as credible. The pace of vaccination simply is too fast. That would imply to be credible.
Speaking of Treasury, we're focusing on our fiscus now, and it seems that Treasury's budget is banking on a wage freeze, which might never actually happen because of the back and forth with Labour. Another thing that people and various stakeholders are very worried about, Peter, is this idea that we may get an increase in taxes. How is Treasury supposed to be navigating this particular environment without putting even more pressure on the country's citizens or taxpayers?
So the real issue on the public sector wage bill is the budget, in a sense, is happening at the wrong time. There's going to probably be no resolution on the public sector wage issues. It's ultimately a political decision. So the budget will show there's still this flat nominal, so no change in wages from this fiscal year to next fiscal year, from March to April, which I think is not a credible outcome. It's going to be a little bit higher than that. It's certainly not credible, the current assumption, to have 4 full years from the current fiscal year through the coming 3 of flat wages. So I think that's really the test of credibility that investors are testing National Treasury on. And of course, there's a huge shift in the dial around the fiscus and sustainability, depending on very small moves in what happens on wages. But you said about the taxes. I think the tax debate is a little bit of a deflection strategy by Treasury. I think they have no particular interest in hiking taxes. I think the purpose of this debate is to show how tough the fiscal situation is and that pain is required from some places. But if there are tax hikes, I think it would be wrong to sort of say that they're for the vaccine. Ultimately, fiscuses and governments are meant to do good things like vaccinate populations. It's the sort of, if you like, the most worst thing that's been spent money on is what it should be tagged against, those tax hikes. And so there would be tax hikes, ultimately to pay for SAA, I think would be a much better way of viewing it.
Very interesting insights as always. That is Peter Attard Montalto. He's the head of capital markets and research at Intellidex.